My father gave my sister a BMW 5 Series, the keys to the family cottage in Muskoka, and a speech that lasted 22 minutes. I sat in the corner of my parents' living room in Oakville and nobody said my name. Not once. Not in the toasts, not in the photo captions my mother was already composing on her phone, not in the handshakes and long embraces my father handed out like currency to everyone, except the son sitting 6 feet away in a chair by the window. My sister's name, Paige, was said 41 times, I counted. When you are invisible in a room full of your own family, you find ways to occupy your mind. Counting is one of them. It was a Saturday afternoon in April, the kind of gray, warm Ontario spring where the lake smell starts coming back, and people leave their coats half open like they're daring the season to turn. My sister Paige had just been named senior partner at Alderton and Crane Architecture in downtown Toronto. 43 people in my parents' house in Oakville to celebrate. Family, colleagues from the firm, a few of my mother's friends from the neighborhood who came because my mother had a talent for building audiences for moments she wanted witnessed. The BMW was parked in the driveway, graphite gray-white bow on the hood, the same bow my father had put on Paige's first car at 17. I watched him gesture toward the window when he revealed it. The room turned. I didn't. Paige has always known exactly what she wanted to build, my father said. His name is Rowan Renshaw, 64 years old, retired structural engineer, the kind of man who assessed everything in terms of load-bearing capacity and whether it would hold, and she has built it. This family couldn't be prouder. Applause. My mother Elaine standing beside him, squeezing his arm, her face the expression she wore at every milestone that confirmed the story she and my father had written about their family. The story where Paige was the chapter that made sense and I was the footnote that didn't. I didn't stand up, I didn't leave. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the room celebrate my sister the way I had watched from the edge of every room this family had ever held a celebration in. From the back row, always. Not because anyone told me to sit there, because that was where I had learned I belonged. But before I tell you what happened at that party, before I tell you about Priya and what she said and what my father's face did when she said it, I need to tell you about the label, because without the label you can't understand the life I built after it. My name is Rowan Renshaw. I was born in 1986 in Oakville, Ontario, the first child of Calvin and Elaine Renshaw. For 4 years I was the only child, which meant I was the default heir to whatever my parents were building. Then Paige arrived in 1990, and then 3 years after that, the diagnosis arrived. ADHD, I was 8 years old. A specialist at McMaster Children's Hospital explained it to my parents. My brain processed attention and impulse differently, not broken, different. There were strategies, accommodations, medication options. I could learn, I could succeed. I just needed different conditions. My mother nodded and said she'd look into the options. My father heard the diagnosis and said, so he can't sit still and focus. That's what it comes down to. It's more complex than that, Mr. Renshaw. ADHD affects executive function, working memory, attention regulation. Can he be an engineer? A pause with the right support, absolutely. My father was an engineer. I'm an engineer. It's what the men in this family do. That's something to revisit when Rowan is older, right now. Right now he can't finish a sentence without losing the thread. That's what I'm dealing with. He wasn't wrong about the sentence thing. He wasn't wrong about a lot of the observable facts. What he was wrong about was what those facts meant. But he'd already decided what they meant, and in my father's world, a decided thing was a done thing. Paige read early. Paige finished things. Paige sat at the kitchen table and completed her homework in 45 minutes flat, organized her binders by color, won the science fair twice, got into every program she applied to. My father watched her the way you watch something that confirms every belief you had about what good looks like. He watched me the way you watch a structural calculation that keeps coming out wrong. By the time I was in high school, the division was architecture. Paige was the building. I was the problem in the foundation. She got the summer engineering programs at U of T. I got tutors I couldn't focus through and report cards my father read in silence before folding and setting aside without comment. The comment he did make I wasn't supposed to hear. I was 15. He was on the back porch after Thanksgiving dinner with my Uncle Les, the screen door not quite shut. Paige is going somewhere, my father said. She's got the discipline, the focus. She sees a thing through. And Rowan? A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. Rowan can't stay on one thing long enough to see it anywhere. He picks up, puts down, moves on, no follow-through. It's like trying to build with wet cement. Nothing sticks. Wet cement, not said with cruelty, said with the particular weariness of a man who had assessed the situation and arrived at a conclusion he wasn't happy about but believed was accurate. I stood on the other side of the screen door and heard it. I went back inside. I helped my mother clear the table. I said nothing. But something shifted, not broke, shifted. The way a wall shifts when the load redistributes. You don't see the crack forming. You just know the structure will never be exactly the same. I made a decision that night. I would not ask my father for anything, not his approval, not his money, not his connections. I would build something on my own terms with my own hands, and it would not be the thing he expected, because the thing he expected I couldn't give him, but there would be something else. There had to be. I graduated high school in 2004. Barely. Paige was 14 and already being scouted for the IB program at the school across town. My father came to my graduation. He sat near the back. He did not stand when my name was called. In the parking lot afterward, he said, "So, what's the plan, Rowan?" "Trades program, George Brown." He looked at me the way an engineer looks at a load calculation that has produced a disappointing number. "Trades." "Electrical, I want to be an electrician." "That's not," he stopped himself. "Okay, if that's what you think you can do." I left Oakville that September, moved to Hamilton, 45 minutes down the QEW, but a different world from the lakefront neighborhood my parents lived in. A world where you worked with your hands and nobody asked what your father did for a living. I had $1,200 saved from a summer job at Canadian Tire and a room in a house near Barton Street with 3 other guys starting trade apprenticeships. I did the pre-apprenticeship program at George Brown, then I got my apprenticeship with a mid-sized electrical contractor in Burlington. Spent 4 years on job sites, commercial, industrial, some residential, running conduit, pulling wire, roughing in panels, terminating switchgear. The physical logic of how power moves through a building. I understood it in a way I had never understood a textbook or a classroom. The system had a shape you could see and trace and hold in your mind all at once. ADHD had made me impossible to contain in a desk. On a job site, it made me fast. I could hold a building's electrical layout in my head the way a chess player holds a board. I walked a space once and the circuit paths organized themselves into something I could navigate without looking at the prints twice. My foreman noticed it. His name was Hector Tran, 58 years old, Vietnamese-Canadian, had been running electrical crews in southern Ontario for 30 years. He'd seen 1,000 apprentices. "You've got something most guys don't have," he said one afternoon. We were in the brake trailer, coffee from the Tim's down the road. "You see the whole system at once. Most guys see the section in front of them. You see where the wire wants to go before you've pulled it. It's just how my brain works." "I know, I've seen it before, it's not common." He paused. "You should think about where you want to take this, because being a journeyman your whole career, that's not where this kind of brain belongs." Hector became my mentor. Not formally, he never used the word and neither did I. He just started teaching me the other side of the work, how to read a scope, how to price a job, how to build a reputation with general contractors, the business of electrical, not just the craft of it. I got my certificate of qualification in 2010. In March 2011, I registered with the ECR and drove my father's old pickup, the one he'd sold me for $1 when he bought a new one, to my first solo job, a small commercial fit-out in a strip mall in Dundas. $14,000 done in a week with one helper. $14,000, more than a month's pay as a journeyman, for one job I designed, managed, and delivered myself. I named the company Groundwork Electrical, filed the papers, opened a business account at the RBC branch on King Street West, and called Paige to tell her. "That's great, Rowan," she said, in the same tone our mother used when she wrote "Rowan is doing well" in the family Christmas letter, the tone that means I have registered your words and will not be updating my understanding of you. I didn't call my father. By 2013, I had 3 full-time electricians. By 2015, 10. I hired Priya Kapoor in 2014. She'd been an operations manager at a mid-sized MEP firm in Mississauga, was smarter than everyone she worked for, and had made the mistake of saying so too plainly, which meant she was available. She ran our scheduling, contracts, and compliance. I handled business development and the technical side. We argued about everything except the one thing that mattered. We were building something, and we would not cut corners to do it. By 2018, Groundwork had 22 licensed electricians and was doing commercial and light industrial work across the Hamilton-Burlington corridor into Mississauga, reaching toward Toronto revenue that year, $2.8 million. By 2022, 41 electricians, 4 project managers, a satellite office in Mississauga. Revenue $5.6 million. The business was valued conservatively at somewhere between $7 and $9 million. My father still thought I was running a small shop somewhere. In 2021, Groundwork's business development team landed a new account, Alderton and Crane Architecture, my sister Paige's firm. They needed a reliable electrical sub for a series of mixed-use commercial projects in the GTA, complicated scopes, tight timelines, buildings that needed someone who could think through electrical systems holistically rather than just follow spec sheets mechanically. The account was managed by my project director, Terrence Walsh, who had no idea that the architecture firm he was pitching employed the principal's sister. Alderton and Crane approved the contract, started paying Groundwork approximately $380,000 a year. I found out about the account 2 weeks after it was signed. I was reviewing our active client list and saw the name. I stared at it for a long time, then I closed the file and said nothing. I didn't call Paige. I didn't cancel the contract. I didn't call my father and say, the company that does the electrical work on your daughter's architecture projects is the company your unfocused son built. I let it run, because the irony wasn't a weapon, it was just a fact, and I had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you can do with a fact is let it exist without needing anyone else to acknowledge it. But Priya knew. Priya always knew everything. Your sister's firm is paying us close to $400,000 a year, she said one afternoon in the groundwork office, rain on the windows, coffee in hand, printed contract in the other, and she doesn't know you own this company. No. Rowan, your father has been telling people you do small residential jobs. He told someone at his golf club you install bathroom fans for a living. I know. And the architecture firm where your sister is about to make senior partner is currently using us as their primary electrical sub on 4 active projects. Yes. And you've never said a word. Why would I? She set down the contract, because your father has spent 38 years deciding you weren't worth investing in, and you have built an $8 million company that is literally keeping his daughter's projects on schedule. He doesn't need to know that. Rowan. Priya, I'm not asking your permission. She looked at me for a moment, then she picked up her coffee and walked back to her office, and I knew with the certainty you develop after 10 years working alongside someone that she was not done. That was February, the party in Oakville was April. I had been sitting in the chair by the living room window for 90 minutes when Priya walked through the front door. She was wearing a blazer. Priya never wore a blazer. She wore it now because she had decided unilaterally without asking me that this was the occasion for one. She crossed the room. She found me by the window. She crouched to eye level. Don't, I said. You've been sitting here for an hour and a half, and your father just finished telling a room full of people that Paige is the definition of what this family stands for. I heard. Did he mention you once? My Aunt Helen asked if I wanted more quiche. Priya almost smiled. Almost. Then she stood up and walked toward the front of the room, and I felt the particular sensation of a man watching something he cannot stop, because stopping it would require getting up and crossing a room and admitting that what was happening mattered to him, and I had spent 38 years insisting that it didn't. My father was standing near the fireplace, drink in hand, holding court the way he always did. Paige beside him, my mother Elaine circulating, making sure every guest had been seen, the room still buzzing from the BMW reveal. Priya walked up to my father. She extended her hand. Mr. Renshaw, I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Priya Kapoor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Groundwork Electrical. My father shook her hand. Something crossed his face, not recognition of Priya, but of the company name, Groundwork. Yes, you do work for Alderton and Crane. We've been their primary electrical subcontractor for 3 years, 4 active projects currently. Good firm. I've heard Paige speak highly of the work. That's kind. I wanted you to know who owns it. She turned, she pointed at me, across the room, in the chair by the window, in the button-down shirt I'd bought myself, the son who had learned to sit at the edge of every room his family had ever put him in. Groundwork Electrical was founded and is solely owned by your son, Rowan Renshaw. Here is what silence sounds like in a room of 43 people. It sounds like the moment before weather changes, when the air pressure drops and something electrical hasn't discharged yet. It sounds like 43 people simultaneously revising a sentence they thought they knew the end of. My father looked at Priya, then at me, then at Priya again. That's not Rowan does small. Groundwork Electrical has 45 licensed electricians and 4 project managers operating across the Greater Toronto and Hamilton region, Priya said. Her voice was level and precise, the voice she used in contract negotiations. We serve over 100 commercial clients. Annual revenue is approximately $6.2 million. The company is valued at between $8 and $10 million. And the company that has been doing the electrical work on your daughter's architecture projects for 3 years was built from the ground up by the son sitting in the corner, who you haven't spoken to since you arrived. The room was looking at me now, 43 pairs of eyes. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Paige looked at me the way you look at something you thought you understood and have just realized you were reading from the wrong side. My father's face did something I had not seen it do in 38 years. The structure cracked, the engineer's composure, the load-bearing certainty of a man who had spent his whole life calculating what could hold weight and what couldn't, cracking. Rowan, quiet, the quiet of a man whose certainty has just been punctured from underneath. Is this true? I got up from the chair, buttoned my jacket, walked through the room, through the guests and the colleagues and the Oakville neighbors who had spent the last 2 hours celebrating the Renshaw child who mattered while the other one sat by the window. I stopped in front of my father, 3 feet between us, about the same distance that had existed my entire life. "Yes," I said, "it's true. You own Groundwork. Founded it, built it, own it. You've been doing the electrical work for Paige's firm. 3 years, close to $400,000 a year, 4 projects right now, including the Etobicoke development you were at the site visit for last fall. That was Groundwork's work. You were standing on our panel room. Why didn't you tell me?" The question, the one Priya had asked, and Hector, and the accountant who knew my family history, and the broker who had valued the business. "Because you never asked." The room held its breath. "Not once in 38 years did you ask what I was building. You decided when I was 8 years old that I was unfocused. You decided when I was 15 that I was wet cement. Nothing sticks, nothing holds. You decided when Paige got into U of T that you had 1 child worth betting on and 1 child worth managing down. And you managed me down, Dad, quietly, consistently, for 30 years. You managed me down so thoroughly that I could build an $8 million company, and you would never know because you stopped looking." His mouth opened, closed. "The firm that does the electrical work on your daughter's architecture projects, the company that Paige has personally recommended to 2 other firms, that company was started by the son you called wet cement. Started with a $1 pickup truck and a 2-week job in a strip mall in Dundas. Built without your money, without your connections, without your name on a single document. Built by a man with ADHD who you decided couldn't follow through on anything." I turned to my mother. Elaine was standing by the archway to the dining room, both hands over her mouth, eyes wet. "Mom, you wrote Rowan is doing well in the Christmas letter for 15 years. Do you know what that reads like from the inside? It reads like the sentence you write so you can say you mentioned it without having to explain it, the same way you'd mention a plant you forgot to water that somehow hasn't died yet." She closed her eyes. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's been sitting in this family like a load that nobody wants to name, and I am done pretending the structure is fine." I looked at Paige. She was standing beside my father, and her face was not what I expected. Not defensiveness, not the composure of someone who has always been the point of the story. I saw something simpler, genuine confusion. The confusion of a person who has never had to think about what the room looks like from the back row, because they have always been at the front. "Paige." "Rowan, I didn't. You recommended us to 2 other firms. You told your managing partner Groundwork was the best electrical sub you'd worked with in 5 years. Did you ever think to ask who owned it?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "You've never asked what I do for a living, not in an adult conversation, not ever. The last time you asked about my work I was 22 and doing my apprenticeship, and you asked if I wore a hard hat. That was the question. That is how much space my life has taken up in yours." "That's not fair." "It's not about fair, Paige, it's about what happened. And what happened is that this family built a story. Dad is the engineer, Paige is the architect, Rowan is the one we're managing down, and everyone in this room has been living in that story so long they stopped checking whether it was still accurate. It stopped being accurate around 2015. Nobody checked." The room was absolutely still. 43 people witnessing something that should have been private but wasn't, because 38 years of private had never been enough to make it stop. I hadn't planned to say any of this. Priya had forced the reveal, and I had meant to confirm it and find a reason to leave. But standing in the living room of the house where I heard my father call me wet cement through a screen door, something opened. Not anger. Something older than anger. The accumulated weight of 3 decades of being subtracted from the equation. Every report card folded and set aside without comment. Every Christmas letter that reduced me to a footnote. Every dinner table conversation that orbited Paige's achievements while mine went unmentioned because they didn't exist in the family's version of reality. "I need you to understand something, Dad. I didn't build Groundwork to prove you wrong. I built it because after you called me wet cement, I decided I would never need your assessment again. Not your approval, not your money, not your criteria. I would find out what I could actually do on my own terms. And what I can do, it turns out, is run a company." My father was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not pride, that would come later maybe, if it came at all, and I was no longer certain I needed it to. Not anger, the defensive reframing would come later too. In that moment he was looking at me with the expression of a structural engineer who has just discovered that the element he rated as non-load bearing has been holding up the whole wing. $8 million, he said quietly. Between 8 and 10, depending on the metric. And Paige's firm has been paying you. Since 2021, the Etobicoke project, the Scarborough warehouse, the 2 Mississauga developments, all groundwork. Your daughter's firm has been one of our better accounts." He had nothing to say. For the first time in my life, Calvin Renshaw had nothing to say. I didn't do anything dramatic. I turned away from him the way you turn when you have said what needed saying and the room has become too small for what's inside it. Paige caught me in the hallway. "Rowan, wait." I stopped. My sister was 42 years old, senior partner at one of the more respected architecture firms in Toronto, measured and precise in the way people become when they have spent 20 years being exactly who everyone expected them to be. She was standing in our parents' hallway, looking at me like she was trying to find the right calculation for something she'd never had to calculate before. "I genuinely didn't know," she said, "about the company, any of it." "I know you didn't." "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at her for a moment. "Would you have heard it? If I'd called you while you were at U of T and said, 'Paige, I'm starting an electrical contracting company in Hamilton,' would you have heard what that meant? Or would you have said, 'That's great,' Rowan, in exactly the same tone as always?" She flinched because she knew the answer. We both did. "I would have said 'That's great,'" she admitted, "and I wouldn't have asked a follow-up question. Because asking a follow-up question would have required updating the story, and the story was comfortable for everyone except me." She was quiet for a moment, the rain on the windows, the muffled sounds of the party still technically happening in the other room, the party that had become something else entirely. "Can I see it?" she asked. "The shop, the projects, whatever you'll show me." I looked at my sister, 42 years old, architect, the person who had been handed the frame while I built outside it, standing in our parents' hallway asking to see what I had made. "Come to Hamilton next month," I said. "I'll walk you through the Mississauga site." "I'd like that." "We're real boots, it's a working site." She almost smiled. "I own steel-toed boots." "Architect boots are actual boots." "I'll buy actual boots." That was April. It's July now, and the summer is that particular southern Ontario humid that makes the air feel like something you have to push through, and Groundwork just signed a contract for a new warehouse complex in Brampton, the largest scope we've ever taken on. 12 licensed electricians, 14 months, a general contractor I've been trying to land for 3 years. I told Priya she was out of line for showing up at the party without asking me. She said I know, and I'd do it again. I gave her a raise. She'd earned it, not for the party, but for 10 years of making groundwork work while I was still building it. Paige came to the Mississauga site. She borrowed boots from a friend, actual site boots, scuffed, not new. She walked through the building with me and watched the way an architect watches a site, reading the structure through its details, understanding scope through what's been done and what hasn't. "This is yours," she said at some point, standing in the middle of a large open floor where my team had just finished the rough-in for the panel rooms. "It is. Not a small shop. It hasn't been for a while." She was quiet. "Then I recommended you to Morrison Group last month, before I knew. I told their project manager that Groundwork was the most technically capable sub we'd worked with in years. I said the person running it clearly understood buildings as systems, not just as a checklist of specs to follow." She looked at me. "I was talking about you. I just didn't know I was talking about you." I didn't have an answer for that. Sometimes there isn't one. "My father hasn't called. I'm not sitting by the phone." Calvin Renshaw is a man who has spent 64 years being certain. Discovering that your certainty about your own son was wrong for 30 years is not the kind of structural failure a man like him moves through quickly. He'll recalibrate, or he won't. Either way, there is a warehouse complex in Brampton that needs wiring. Hector drove up from Burlington last week. He's 68 now, retired, still wearing the kind of worn Red Wings he wore on every job site I ever worked with him. He walked through the Mississauga project, looked at the team, looked at the fleet of vans in the lot. "Your father is wrong about you, Rowan," he said. "You've known that. Stop giving his version any more real estate in your head." "Working on it." "Work faster, then. Stand at the front of the room. You've been on this job site long enough." My mother called 3 days after the party. I let it go twice, the third time I picked up. "I have to say something to you, and I need you to let me say it." "Okay." "I let your father set the terms for how we saw you from the beginning. When the diagnosis came and he decided what it meant, I didn't correct him. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was taking the easier path. It was easier to accept his version of you than to fight for a different one. And you paid for it for 30 years. And I am the one who should have stood between you and that verdict, and I didn't." I was standing at the window in the groundwork office, the Hamilton skyline, the escarpment in the distance, my fleet of vans lined up in the lot below. "I hear you, Mom." Her voice caught. Is that enough for now? It's a start, I said. It's going to take some time. I have time. So do I. My girlfriend Zoe, civil engineer, which under different circumstances my father would have found impressive, said something the night after the party that I keep coming back to. We were on the couch in our apartment in the East End of Hamilton. I'd been quiet most of the evening. How are you feeling about all of it? She asked. Complicated. Good complicated or bad complicated? Both. Paige wants to build something real between us. My mother wants to apologize properly. My father wants to act like the numbers came out differently than they did. And you? I want to go to work Monday and sort out the panel schedule for Brampton. She was quiet for a moment, then, so go to work Monday. Let the other stuff find its pace. You're not the one who needs to solve it. You sound like a project manager. I sound like someone who loves a man who built a company in a city his family forgot to look at, and still wakes up before the sun because the work doesn't wait. She's right, the work doesn't wait. It's early morning. I'm standing in the groundwork lot in Mississauga, coffee from the Tims on Hurontario, watching my crew start their day. The sun is coming up orange behind the July clouds. My foreman is running through the daily briefing. The lift is already in position. 45 electricians, 4 project managers, 100+ commercial clients across southern Ontario, $6.2 million in annual revenue, a Brampton contract that will push us past 7, a company built by a man his father called wet cement. Here is what I know about wet cement that my father, structural engineer, load-bearing expert, the man who spent his career assessing what could hold weight, never seemed to understand. Wet cement isn't weak. Wet cement is the phase before the structure. It's what you have before it becomes the thing that holds the building up. You can shape it, pour it, direct it where it needs to go. You can build with it if you understand what it actually is. The problem isn't the wet cement. The problem is when someone looks at it in that unfinished state and decides no form is possible. When they see the material before it has found its structure and call it a verdict instead of a phase. My father looked at me at 8 years old and decided I would never set. He was wrong. I just needed different conditions than he knew to look for. A loading dock instead of a classroom, a set of prints instead of a textbook, the spatial logic of a system that runs through walls instead of words on a page. He called it wet cement. He meant it as a judgment. I took it as a material. And if someone in your life has ever looked at you in your unfinished phase and decided that was your final state, if you've been called the difficult one, the unfocused one, the one we're managing down, I want you to know something from the other side of it. They stopped watching too soon. What they called your weakness is exactly what let you build what they never saw coming. Drop something in the comments if you know what I mean. I'll see you in the next one.